That's right. Well, Catskill Forestry Association is a nonprofit, like you said, that's built up of private landowners in the Catskill region. The Catskills have never had markets for the poorer quality trees, low-grade trees. Paper mills never were built there because it was all cleared for agriculture prior to paper mills being built. So that was our interest in trying to develop something. On top of that, you've got communities that are kind of suffering economically, struggling, I should say. And so we thought that maybe these two things could work together. So that's how we started thinking about this. Back in 2010, we started thinking about it. 2011, we actually started a feasibility study. But what we're looking at is district energy. Okay, and of course, district energy can be, you can use any fuel source you want, but it is more efficient. It's really a central plant providing thermal heat to multiple buildings. It has underground pipelines distributing the hot water to these buildings, and then the energy is extracted off of that hot water. The hot water doesn't run through the building, but the energy, the heat from that hot water is taken off, used in that building, and that's how the whole thing works. Why would we look at district energy? Because same reason we get electricity that way. When you have a lot of buildings in a small area, you go out, you outsource to get your electricity, you outsource to get your water, you outsource to get your sewer. And so we're thinking maybe we can do this with heat also. You have low predictable energy costs. They're not going to escalate, go up and down like we've seen oil prices, gas prices, electricity over the past 20 years, fluctuating all over the place. You're going to have more local jobs. You're going to have dollars that remain in the local economy as opposed to going outside the area. You're going to have reduced heating costs, and landowners surrounding these plants would be able to maintain ownership of land and support local forest products industry, as well as keep their lands in forest, as opposed to selling it off to a higher and better use, which I would argue it's not better. You have reliable equipment in one place being maintained. I know that my furnace is probably not cleaned every single year. This would be maintained and cleaned and serviced all the time. Use of plentiful and renewable resource. I've already said we've got plenty of trees. We're growing 3 to 4 times, and the Catskills probably greater than 4 times the number of trees that we're losing to death or being cut. You have reduced environmental risks and hazards. When we had the flood in this village, Fleischman's, with Irene, several of the fuel oil tanks ended up in the river and down in New York City's reservoir, or down towards that way. So that would reduce that. You'd have just one big pile of pellets or chips up on a high elevation, and you'd eliminate all of that. You'd also eliminate furnaces in everybody's house, incendiary devices. Fire department really liked that idea. And you're purchasing heat. You're not purchasing fuel. So you're not buying a tank full of anything in the beginning of the season and then using it. You're actually just paying for what heat you use, just as you do with electricity. Carbon dioxide emissions can be reduced probably 75 to 90% over using oil. You're also taking carbon out of the system that's only been there for a few years in the form of a tree, which is just storing it for a short period, and then your trees are regrowing in the same area where you cut that tree, so it's a very quick, short cycle. Now, we had started this, like I said, back in 2011, and I've lived in New York State for 35 years, and I have never heard a governor come out in a state document, state of the state document, and say anything about wood thermal heat, or even our forests very much, other than in a preservation mode. So I was pretty excited about this. It kind of dovetailed with what we were thinking in this one community, which would be duplicated hopefully in a lot of other communities that don't have the capabilities of hooking up to natural gas. Renewable Heat New York will help catalyze a sustainable private sector-driven market for biomass heating. I like private sector. A renewable and highly efficient heating source derived from low-grade wood harvested from our own forests, right there. Biomass fuel combines economic and environmental benefits. It's considerably cheaper. He had said half the price of oil. Maybe I think he's being extremely conservative. I'd say it's closer to 20% the cost of oil, but maybe he knows something that we don't know, that oil prices are going down even further. Many New Yorkers will see significant savings in their heating bills using the efficient low-emission technologies. 95% of our heat dollars in this state are going outside the state right now. 95%, and it's a big number. It would be much nicer if we could at least keep some of those dollars here in the state. By encouraging the best practices in sustainable forest management, the state can maintain and improve the health of its forests. Obviously, our forests are a little bit stagnating, especially in the Catskills, where there are no markets for the lower grade, poor quality trees, and we're getting to the point where we have a monoculture of just 3 or 4 shade tolerant species. So this would help us in managing our forests and making them a lot healthier. And taking advantage of the economic opportunity presented by biomass heating is one of the top priorities. Top priorities, that was pretty strong verbiage from the governor, to several of the regional economic development councils. Next slide, yeah. It's a long-term commitment to help the high efficiency and low emission biomass heating industry reach scale. I hope that that is true, because this type of a thing is very capital intensive and it takes a long time to get these types of projects off the ground. Renewable Heat New York will also challenge communities to develop clustered approaches for sustainable biomass heating markets through a competitive grant program. And hearing that after we were already started on this project really sweetened the pot for us. It really made it nice. And you can see on that slide in the lower left, that's the proposed study area in Fleischmann's, New York, the red lines. Renewable Heat New York will also work to develop long-term, reasonably priced private sector financing to cover the upfront cost. And that's true. I mean, even in a residential situation, you're probably talking at $20,000 in order to put in a pellet furnace, very efficient pellet furnace. And you're going to probably spend $5,000 to $8,000 to put in a new oil furnace. So your initial struggle, even though it is paid for over time, there's a lot of initial outlay of cash, and not many of us have that kind of cash laying around to do, even though it would be a good investment. And finally, the state will provide support so that sustainable forestry practices are available for small and large landowners and are utilized to maintain and enhance the long-term health and productivity of New York forests. And of course, this is why the Catskill Forestry Association got involved in this a number of years ago. Now, this individual project history is the Village of Fleischmann's, about 350 residents, full-time residents in this community. And the Catskill Forest Association and the SUNY School of Environmental Science Forestry contracted out to Burke, the Biomass Energy Resource Center, to do a feasibility study, initial feasibility study. And the funding for this was obtained through the New York City Department of Environmental Protection and the U.S. Department of Energy. We began this study in March 2011. There was a project hold after Tropical Storm Irene hit Fleischmann's. You know, nobody's mind was much on doing new things. We're trying to clean up the mess from what had happened. And then we picked it up again in April of 2012. We gave a presentation in May of 2013 to the Village Board of Trustees just to get them kind of more knowledgeable about this so that when they're asked by somebody else, they'd be the first people to know. Preliminary feasibility study was completed in August of 2013, last year. And then we did a bus tour for the residents in November of 2013 so that they could see a like project. Although it was for a complex of buildings that were all owned by one entity, a private high school actually. And we have recently submitted funding requests to the Southern Tier Regional Economic Development Council, and we should hear in December the progress on that. So what you're trying to do here is supply hot water for space heating and hot water for 170 year-round buildings and another 35 seasonal buildings. Next slide. And this is the proposed study area, 17,000 feet of piping put underground, similar to any other type of piping. It's very flexible, though. It can be put underground with machinery that you don't have to dig trenches necessarily. It could be thread. The next slide shows the location. It will be up high, away from the river, where we can have the storage of the chips and the plant itself, or pellets. Next slide. The idea here is that we would have one wood-fired hot water boiler, backup peaking oil boiler in the building, because it's very inefficient to run a furnace at 70% of its capabilities. You're turning it on, shutting it down and stuff. So what you want to do is undersize it slightly and then have a smaller boiler or a separate boiler to hit it for the peak, and in the summer days when all you're doing is heating hot water. There'll be 7 days of on-site chips there, or pellets, all pumps and motors for hot water supply and return, the backup electric generator in case you have a power outage. So you just have one of those and everybody still has heat in their house. State-of-the-art emissions controls and automated system controls and computerized monitoring, much as what Dave was talking about. An interesting thing here is this plant would use probably only about 5,200 tons of chips in a year. To give you an idea of how much that is, 8 cords equals 20 tons. And if you're going to thin an acre, typically just to thin it out, 1 acre would produce about 8 cords, so 20 tons. So therefore, if you were just thinning forests to improve them, you'd be able to thin 260 acres a year. If you were just taking the tops out of the sawlog trees, which are currently being left in the forest, and a few of the trees that you knock into accidentally taking the sawlogs out, you would only need 500 acres, and you would improve those 500 acres. So it's surprising how few acres can produce everything. Now this slide just shows you kind of the mechanical, how this works, the chips going into the furnace, how the grates work. These furnaces, they operate at 1,500 to 2,000 degrees. They're not your wood stove at all. And then state-of-the-art takes out most of the particulates. Now you can do that. This is much more efficient than, in fact, this system here, heating 250 buildings, would probably emit the same particulates as 5 or 6 wood stoves. So if you replace 5 or 6 wood stoves, and in 250 buildings, you're probably going to replace a lot more than that, you're already ahead of the game on particulates, and you're way ahead of the game on carbon dioxide. The building space would be about 600,000 square feet, not a big village, a lot of small buildings. Length of the main pipeline, 17,000 feet. 205 buildings would be connected. The boiler size would be 11 million BTUs per hour. The tons of wood chips consumed annually, as I said, a little over 5,000 tons. And we would be displacing about 300,000 gallons of heating oil. That's what that community uses. The wood energy system, the costs, I'm not going to go through all the details, but the total will be about $13 million. I would say that by the time this thing actually gets off the ground, we're probably going to be up closer to 15 or 16 million. as prices escalate. Next slide. Okay, and the way that this would be financed is we're hoping that 50% of it would be obtained through grants, and 50% would be borrowing the money for the village, and there'd be about a 20-year payback, probably quite considerably less than that. We used very conservative figures as far as the difference between the fuel costs, and even during that time, the customers would be saving 15%. So, next slide. That would be the area that we'd be able to drain wood from. The yellow is 30 miles, the orange is within 50 miles. Most likely, because you only need such a small amount of fuel chips, it's going to come within 5 miles, 5 or 10 miles. But you can spread out. And we're kind of hoping that other communities in those same circles will do the same thing. And saves money, replaces oil, propane, natural gas, provides more local control, creates a lot of local jobs, lowers carbon footprint, keeps dollars in the local economy. They typically cycle 5 or 6 times a dollar when it's kept there, and creates local stable markets for low-grade and small-diameter wood products. It's win-win just about any way you think about it. So there is a film that was made for this project. You can go to the last slide. There was a film that was made for this project. At the bottom of the slide, you can see this is our website currently. It's going to be changing, so if you go in there quickly, you're going to go to the old one. If you scroll down on the front, on the home page, you'll see that there's a film there that you can watch. It's about 16 minutes long. It's a nice little video that shows this project a little bit more depth. And also, if anybody is interested in seeing the preliminary feasibility study, which has a lot of information in it, if you email me,